Ron, thank you very much. I want to thank the American Academy of Diplomacy. I want to thank the Fletcher School. I'm greatly honored to have been invited to participate in this Sisco forum. Joe Sisco was one of the greatest American diplomats of any era. It's a great privilege to be invited, Carol. And I'm also delighted to be on the same program with three other distinguished American diplomats, John Lippert, Ron Newman, and of course, Bill Burns. You'll be meeting him later in the program. And as Ambassador Newman mentioned, I'll be talking about the Iran nuclear deal, whose formal title is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. You'll hear that acronym. And depending on whom you listen to, the Iran nuclear deal is either a monumental diplomatic achievement or one of the worst agreements ever concluded by the United States. It will either block Iran's path to nuclear weapons or it will pave Iran's way to nuclear weapons capability. It'll either help stabilize the Middle East or boost Iran's efforts to achieve regional hegemony. And I am not a neutral observer in this debate. I served as a member of the American negotiating team under Ambassador Bill Burns in the early years of the talks, and I believe the JCPOA is an excellent agreement that must be preserved. But I recognize that the deal is one of the most controversial agreements the U.S. has ever negotiated, and that its sustainability over the long term is far from guaranteed. The JCPOA was concluded in July 2015 between Iran and the so-called P5+1 countries, the US, Britain, Germany, France, China, and Russia. It provides for deep reductions in Iran's uranium enrichment capacity, as well as the design of an Iranian nuclear reactor that was originally intended to produce weapons-grade plutonium for Iran's nuclear weapons program. Together, these constraints effectively block Iran's ability to produce enough nuclear material for a single nuclear weapon for at least a period of 10 to 15 years. The JCPOA also calls for highly intrusive and innovative monitoring measures to be carried out by the International Atomic Energy Agency that are capable of detecting Iranian noncompliance with high confidence. In exchange for these constraints on Iran's nuclear program, the US, the European Union, and the UN Security Council agreed to suspend the nuclear-related sanctions that had devastated Iran's economy. Now, well into the second year of the deal, all parties appear to be abiding by their commitments. The IAEA has issued a series of reports indicating that Iran is in compliance with its nuclear commitments. As expected, the Iranians have sought to interpret the JCPOA in a manner that suits their own interess. But whenever such issues of interpretation have arisen, the United States has stood its ground, and the matter has been satisfactorily resolved. The bottom line, at least so far, is that there are no indications that Iran is engaged in covert activities or is making preparations for breaking out of the agreement. But opposition to the deal in the United States remains strong. Critics are eager to find fault with implementation, often unfairly. For example, a prominent Washington think tank recently charged that the United States and its P5+1 partners had secretly agreed to an exemption allowing Iran to retain more enriched uranium than the 300 kilograms permitted. But actually, the US and its partners had decided, and the Obama administration had informed the Congress, that small amounts of enriched uranium embedded in waste materials would be nearly impossible to recover and use in an Iranian breakout scenario, and would therefore not need to be counted against this 300-kilogram ceiling. It was not a question of allowing Iran to exceed the ceiling with nuclear material that deserved to be counted. But opponents still pounced on this as an evidence that the administration was acquiescing in Iran's efforts to circumvent the agreement. American critics often point out that the key restrictions on Iran's capacity to produce enriched uranium and plutonium will expire. Some expire after 10 years, others after 15 years. And this will enable Iran to increase its nuclear capacities to the point where it could decide to break out and acquire enough nuclear material for a bomb in a matter of weeks. Defenders of the deal say that intrusive monitoring will remain after 15 years, that we would be able to detect any breakout attempt quickly, and that we'd have enough time to intervene to prevent any production of bomb-making material. Still, the eventual expiration of key restraints will remain an object of criticism and a source of uncertainty about Iran's future nuclear intentions. American opponents of the JCPOA have directed much of their criticism not at the deal itself, but at Iranian activities not covered by the deal. Among other things, they cite Tehran's support for Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, its heavy involvement in the Syrian civil war, its continued missile launches, its detention of dual nationals, its crackdown on domestic dissent, its harassment of U.S. naval vessels, and other things. The critics argue that the JCPOA has failed to moderate Iran's external and internal behavior, and they say it has even given Tehran additional resources to pursue aggressive regional and repressive internal policies. JCPOA supporters acknowledge that the deal has not moderated Iranian behavior in areas not covered by the deal, at least not so far. But they say that the deal was not based on optimistic expectations about its impact on Iran's external or internal policies. Instead, it was based on the judgment that eliminating the Iranian nuclear threat was the most immediate priority, and that a comprehensive agreement dealing with other objectionable Iranian policies would not have been negotiable. It was also based on the judgment that Iran's objectionable policies outside the nuclear realm could and should effectively be countered by the United States and its partners, even as they cooperate with Iran in implementing the nuclear deal. Still, if the United States is seen as failing to counter Iran effectively in areas not covered by the nuclear deal, public support for the deal itself could erode. Opponents of the JCPOA in Congress have proposed new legislation that would derail the deal. President Obama can almost surely muster support, enough support to block or veto such legislation, but interest in deal-killing legislation will persist into the next Congress. And of course, the current presidential election introduces another element of uncertainty about the future of the nuclear deal. Hillary Clinton would almost certainly preserve the deal, but might be expected to take a tougher approach toward enforcing it and toward Iranian behavior outside the deal. Donald Trump has vowed to renegotiate or withdraw from it, but it is unclear what he would do as president, especially if he were unable to gain the international support for the reimposition of sanctions strong enough to compel Iran to accept a new deal he would consider acceptable. So opposition to the JCPOA in the United States remains strong, but opposition in Iran may even be stronger, and probably is a more serious threat to the longevity of the deal. Iranian hardliners have argued that the JCPOA is too restrictive of Iran's nuclear program, that it leaves too many sanctions in place, that its monitoring measures are too intrusive, and that it opens Iran to Western economic and cultural influences that will undermine the Islamic Republic's revolutionary values. Most worrisome for the future of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA has become a scapegoat for a slower rate of economic recovery than the Iranian public had been led to expect. Sanctions relief provided by the deal has helped to strengthen Iran's economy. GDP is growing at 4.4%, inflation is down, foreign direct investment is up, oil exports are approaching pre-sanctions levels. But the reluctance of major international banks and businesses to re-engage with Iran has put a damper on Iran's recovery. And Iranian leaders have taken to accusing the United States of dragging its feet on sanctions relief and even pressuring foreign financial institutions to stay away from Iran. In fact, the U.S. and its partners have strictly implemented all the sanctions relief measures required by the JCPOA. The slower than hoped for rate of recovery can be attributed to a range of factors having little to do with U.S. compliance. Among them, the continuing low price of oil, fear by major banks of running afoul of U.S. sanctions that were left in place in the JCPOA. Uncertainty whether the JCPOA will survive upcoming governmental transitions, bureaucratic and regulatory obstacles in Iran to doing business there, and unfavorable risk-reward calculations by foreigners contemplating business with Iran. Several Iranian officials acknowledge that recovery will take a long time and that Iran bears much of the responsibility for putting its own financial and regulatory house in order if it expects to reap the full benefits of sanctions relief. But even supporters of the nuclear deal, responding to the Iranian public's frustration and pressures from Iranian hardliners, have publicly accused the United States of not meeting its commitments. And Iranian leaders are publicly threatening to scale back or terminate their own compliance unless the U.S. fulfills its JCPOA commitments and actively encourages the international financial community to re-engage with Iran. We can expect Iranian hardliners to continue seizing on the disappointing pace of economic recovery, to argue that Iran is not receiving the benefits to which it is entitled, and to build their case for curtailing Iran's compliance or even abandoning the deal. And we can expect the JCPOA to become a political football in the run-up to the May 2017 presidential election in Iran, with opponents of President Rouhani attacking the agreement as a way of undermining prospects for his re-election. And if Rouhani's bid for re-election fails, his successor would almost certainly be less committed to preserving the nuclear deal. So the JCPOA is actually working well, better even than many of its supporters expected. All parties are in compliance, but opponents in Washington and Tehran have not given up on killing the deal. To preserve the deal, the next U.S. administration should take several steps, and I'll mention them quite briefly. First, it should hold Iran to a strict standard of compliance with its nuclear commitments. When inevitable questions of interpretation or inadvertent technical infractions arise, the U.S. should seek prompt, practical, equitable solutions that preserve the integrity of the JCPOA. Second, it should help ensure that Iran receives the economic benefits to which it is entitled. The Obama administration has already done much to help foreign entities understand how they can avoid running afoul of remaining U.S. sanctions, but it can do more. At the same time, the U.S. administration should warn Iran to stop making unfounded accusations that the U.S. is violating its commitments. These accusations only play into the hands of Iranians who want to scuttle the deal. Third, to address concerns about the buildup of Iranian nuclear capacity when key restrictions expire after 10 and 15 years, future U.S. administrations should declare that it is the policy of the United States to prevent Iran from breaking out of the NPT and producing nuclear weapons, if necessary, by the use of military force. Fourth and finally, to shore up support for the nuclear deal at home and abroad and serve U.S. interests more broadly, the next U.S. administration needs to counter provocative Iranian activities outside the nuclear realm, while at the same time keeping a door open to cooperation with Iran if it's prepared to play a constructive regional role. Negotiating the nuclear deal was hard. No one knows that better than Ambassador Burns, but sustaining a well-functioning deal over the long term will be just as hard, and it will require just as much creativity, perseverance, and high-level attention. And preserving the nuclear deal over the long run must not be taken for granted. Thank you.